the co-champion of the queer trivia game we played yesterday. I felt that was the most important credit to start with. But her name is Natalie Bullock Brown. Natalie is an award-winning producer, a 2021 Rockwood Institute Just Films Fellow, and the proud director of the Documentary Accountability Working Group, a collective that created a values-informed framework for ethical storytelling. Natalie is currently working as a director and producer on a documentary exploring the impact of messaging about beauty and aging on Black women. She's also a producer on the award-winning filmmaker Byron Hurt's PBS documentary Hazing, as well as his upcoming Nova film, and Lee and Liza's Family Tree. Please join me in welcoming Natalie Bullock Brown.
Good morning, everyone. I'm incredibly excited and honored to be here today. As was just shared, I'm the proud, fairly new director of the Documentary Accountability Working Group, or DOG, and I just want to acknowledge Danae Peters and Andrew Cataro from Perspective Fund, one of 3 sets of funders without which I would not be here as director. And DOG is a working group that I helped to found in 2020. And that group includes American University Communications Professor Patricia Aufderheide, veteran impact producer and co-director of Color Congress Sonia Childress, Dr. Camila Mumin Oseguera, who is a clinical psychologist and founder of the Muslim Wellness Foundation, Molly Murphy, one of 5 co-directors of Working Films, Sherry Simpson, a senior director at ITVS, and Bawan Suchak, co-director of Youth FX. I am here in part because of the work of the late legendary filmmaker Marlon Riggs, one of my cinematic ancestors, who is the reason why I pursued documentary filmmaking instead of screenwriting right here in DC at Howard University, where I received an MFA in film production many moons ago. And I am here standing on the shoulders of my ancestors, both by blood, like my dad and my grandmothers, and those in my family who were enslaved, and those ancestors I claim, like Ida B. Wells, Zora Neale Hurston, James Baldwin, Toni Morrison, Bell Hooks, and 2 other cinematic ancestors, Kathleen Prettyman Collins and my dear friend Louis Erskine. DOG came together organically in early 2020, pre-pandemic. We tossed our hat into the ring of long-standing ethics conversations within the documentary field with an initial offering, a piece that Sonia Childress and I wrote called The Documentary Future, a Call to Accountability. We were troubled by long-standing issues of inequality and extraction that existed and still exist all over the field, and that were flourishing in the new commercial era at the time that was dominated and still is by streamers. The question we asked ourselves was this: what is a values-based filmmaking practice, and why is it important? Could documentary filmmakers articulate best practices on documentary accountability and ethics? Our vision was aspirational. We wanted to articulate a praxis that was in alignment with the practices of many filmmakers already organically using a values-based approach. Then George Floyd was murdered. The same month, the documentary Future piece was released, and soon this country was in the midst of a racial reckoning. As a result, we found that people throughout the doc field, especially filmmakers, were increasingly interested in engaging in conversations about ethics and accountability in their filmmaking practice. So we first created a set of values as part of an early iteration of what would ultimately become our framework, and shared them with 100 plus filmmakers, film professionals, film professors, and students, and most importantly, film participants. Those values are: integrate anti-oppression practices into your work, be transparent in your relationships, acknowledge your positionality, respect the dignity and agency of the people in your film, prioritize the needs, well-being, and experience of the people associated with your film, treat all potential audience members with dignity, care, and concern. In a series of confidential convenings, filmmakers and film participants offered feedback on early drafts of the framework, including the values, and shared their own experiences navigating interpersonal and structural ethical challenges, often exacerbated by gatekeepers like funders and festivals within the field. We incorporated those important insights into the framework and paid particular concern to the impact of documentary filmmaking on participants. And in September 2022, after several years of research, convening, and refinement of the values and framework structure, we released From Reflection to Release, Framework for Values, Ethics, and Accountability in Nonfiction Filmmaking into the field. The structure of the framework follows the familiar phases of documentary filmmaking: research and development, pre-production, production, post-production, and release impact. However, given what DOG learned from the filmmakers, and especially film participants in our convenings, we decided to codify another phase, which we call reflection. And this is what I'd like to focus on for the remainder of my time. First of all, reflection is something that DOG recognizes just about every filmmaker spends time engaged in. Excuse me. It is that period of time when we consider the merits of pursuing a particular story that we think we want to tell. However, what is incredibly helpful about having a clinical psychologist as a part of your working group is, at least in our case, Dr. Osagera's ability to help us think about the profound impact that the documentary filmmaking process has on film participants and the harm that can result, even from filmmakers with the best of intentions, when time is not taken prior to undertaking a documentary film to engage in introspection and reflection. In the framework, each phase of production, including reflection, is set off with questions and considerations for filmmakers to think about. As a filmmaker myself, I've been particularly struck by the reflection process because I believe that ample reflection can help filmmakers slow down in order to move at a speed that engenders trust and care and that doesn't rush the storytelling process. I've written 2 pieces about reflection, in part to process my own understanding of the framework, and also to hopefully offer provocative questions and framing to help us think more deeply about the filmmaking we undertake. Oh no. Okay. At the end of 2021, I wrote a piece called Considering a Trauma-Informed Process in Documentary of Filmmaking that appeared in the International Documentary Association's documentary magazine. In the piece, I described the horrific targeting of very young Black children by the criminal justice system in a rural county in Tennessee that I read about in the digital publication ProPublica. The story of kids as young as 8 years old being arrested at school for offenses that I promise you, none of us would recognize as criminal, so moved and angered me that I thought about making a documentary film about the situation in Rutherford County. But I had to give the idea a second thought because my work with DOG has helped me understand that too often it's the folk whose stories make documentaries possible who are the last to be considered when a film project is conceived and pursued. So following the DOG framework, I first thought about myself as a filmmaker. Why me? Why should I be the one to take on this film? True, I'm Black and a mom with a heart for Black children. My own daughter is here, but I'm not a resident of Tennessee, let alone Rutherford County. Does that matter? Should it? What would it take for me to tell a story about an experience that isn't my own in a community hundreds of miles from where I live in a way that is just and nuanced and ultimately helpful and impactful to the communities being harmed? I then thought about the process of gaining access to the people, including young children, who are at the heart of the Rutherford County story. How would I feel asking the parents of these children if they'd allow me to tell their stories? And what would I do if they said no? Would I keep asking, hoping to eventually wear them down? For how long would I pursue them? Would it be traumatizing for me to pursue them at all? Is there a way to pursue without trauma? And isn't persistent pursuit coercion? The next piece I wrote about reflection came in December of last year, a little over a month after my dad passed away unexpectedly. I was nearing the end of my time as a documentary film fellow as part of the Harvard Kennedy School's Shorenstein Center, and one of my deliverables was an op-ed. All I could do after my dad died was reflect about my fraught relationship and the security and safety my dad found in religion to manage the trauma of a life in which he straddled the containment of Jim Crow and the disappointment of dreams dashed by racism and divorce, and how he imposed a fearful vision of life on me, his only daughter. Reflection about and healing in my own life, as well as a desire to understand my baggage and resulting biases against my dad and his impact on me, helped me to recognize my dad as a three-dimensional human being who deserves to be remembered as neither sinner nor saint, as Kathleen Collins would say. Understandably, it's far easier to be honest and careful in how we preserve dignity and truth when we're dealing with people with whom we relate, because we are in relationship with and care about them. The question is, how do we translate the natural concern we have for how the folks closest to us are framed into a concern for how any and everyone is framed, especially when we potentially wield power over them as storytellers? So I'm just gonna run through in my few minutes remaining, some of the things that I've learned from and about reflection. My intention must be interrogated. What is my intention? What am I trying to achieve by telling a particular story? I consider myself a social justice filmmaker who is most interested in issues of inequity in terms of race and gender. So if justice is the goal in any story that I tell, exposing the power exerted over the vulnerable or marginalized, like those children and their families in Rutherford County, is likely more effective and less harmful than focusing on those who have been victimized by the powerful. Context is critical for three-dimensional depictions. We can acknowledge the truth about a person or community, but we must explain the background forces that have shaped them to make them who they are. I learned this in thinking about my dad. And introspection reflection helps us draw nearer to ourselves so that we can see and reflect the humanity of others. There's more that I could say, but I'm gonna end with this line from the piece I wrote about my dad, and that is, may we all be led in our storytelling by not only reflection, but a cultivated care for the humanity of those who have entrusted us with their stories, a humanity that reflects our own. Thank you.